coming. We're glad to have you. This is Joel Hynek. The smart one. And I'm pesky brother Paul. There are 5 of us all together. And of late, I've been the one that's been the most active publicly in the community. But I've been trying to get the other 4 involved. And I'm so happy to have Joel here at this conference and here today because he's older, wiser, and he's an engineer. So I'm a French major. So Joel has a really interesting, I'm going to start here, so we're going to scroll through these. Joel has a really interesting perspective, and our father would ask him questions about technical things. Oh, and I got to tell the one story. So our dad asked Joel a technical question. Hey, Joel, would this work? And Joel said, no, Dad, that would create a cosmic spark fest. He wants to give me the little details. And so what's great about that was he doesn't even realize how cool that phrase is, cosmic spark fest. Because he's a humble engineer. Do you want to, is there?
Well, I just thought you ought to explain what it was. Oh, yeah. I just thought you might want to explain what it was. My dad handed me this drawing of basically a flying saucer, but as a see-through diagram explaining how the propulsion system would work. And I took a look at it. It had extremely high voltages indicated, and thought that if it was in our atmosphere, it would indeed be a cosmic spark fest.
Which I think it should be the title of his autobiography or presentations. I think it's really cool. So very happy to have Joel involved. Joel, I want to talk him up because he's my big brother, is a 2-time Academy Award winner. Yeah, thank you. And he created the visual effects for The Matrix along with a team, but he conceived a bullet time, which I think is the most important visual effect, and won the Oscar for What Dreams May Come, was nominated for Predator, won another Technical Academy Award. He won't tell you that. And so we're here today, and we'd like your help, so it's going to be very interactive. This is a workshop. So what we have in mind is, in an attempt to move the needle for science, because I think we can all agree that so far, most of the scientific community has not been won over by the evidence we presented, whether it's mysterious alloys, star maps, whatever. And it's frustrating for all of us who feel that there is a bona fide phenomena. And we may not know if it's extraterrestrial and or interdimensional, time travel, et cetera. But something's happening. And I feel, and I think Joel agrees, I don't care what the US government does. Oh, that was a weird one. They're not constructive in this process. So I think it's more about exposure than disclosure. We have so many means at our hands now that if we experiencers can talk more with scientists in languages that we both understand, I think we can make real progress. So that's sort of the spirit behind the classification system that we have now, which you'll see is very rough form that we'd like to get your input on to sort of augment the close encounter system. Okay, so that's what we'd like to do today, because we want to just think what the world would be like if, so hold on, I'll just say one more thing. If leading scientists would be much more open on television about this, because we've seen a pretty dismissive attitude. And for those of you who haven't seen this in one of our presentations, we'd like to play a short video of my father off the cuff talking about possible origins for the phenomena. Because he explains it, he was a very smart guy, very experienced, and he just explains it in such an open way that I think is really helpful to frame our discussion. So let me just rewind it here.
Would like you to just comment on your worldview or your view of the interpretation of the UFO phenomenon, which was prevalent in the old days, that it was an extraterrestrial investigation of Mother Earth from outside this planet, directed and elusive, but still sort of a purposeful investigation, the ET hypothesis, you may call it. Would you make some comments on where we stand today relative to that relative?
Yeah, I'd like to just start from the history of science standpoint, that any culture will tend to interpret any new phenomenon in terms of its own technology. Had this all occurred in
Middle Ages.
Middle Ages, it would have been given a totally different interpretation, a religious interpretation.
Which it was.
Which it wasn't at that time. We've entered the space age, therefore it is very logical for a new phenomenon of this sort to be interpreted in terms of our own advanced technology. It's also complicated by the fact that astronomy has arrived at the point, we know enough now about the evolution of stars, to make it extremely likely that there are many other intelligences in the universe. But there, I think we have to follow Arthur C. Clarke in pointing out that we take perhaps a much too narrow view of what intelligence in the universe may be. We live on a water planet. It's very logical, therefore, that our bodies are mostly water. It could be that our consciousness expresses itself through protoplasm and through our particular chemistry. There are bits of information today indicating that, for instance, George Wald at Harvard feels that consciousness is the most important factor, and that consciousness can exist in many forms. We are one of those forms. So, as somebody said, the whole question of this trying to communicate with life elsewhere is like the not yet born talking to the long since dead, because it takes so long for anything to get. Furthermore, an advanced civilization might regard radio as we regard jungle drums or smoke signals. They may long since have passed the radio stage of communication. But still, I think it's important that the CITD program continue, because it's an adventure and it should be done. And it would be philosophically important to find out that there is some intelligence elsewhere. So, all that my own philosophical feeling about the UFO phenomenon is that when all is said and done, it represents some form of intelligence. But whether that intelligence is from great distances away, or whether it is perhaps much closer to us in a parallel reality or in another dimension, or whether it is in some strange way a product of our own intelligence, our own psyche, I don't know. This is the research problem. That it seems to be programmed, that it seems to have an intelligence of its own, I think is unmistakable. If anyone who studies the subject just sees that. But we must not jump to the conclusion that because it has an intelligence of its own, it is necessarily visitors from outer space. It may be in some strange way connected with that intelligence, if that intelligence can in some way project itself down here. But, well, that's really all I have to say. That's it.
Good.
Isn't that? Yeah, yeah. Isn't that lovely? It's just, yeah, it's such an ad hoc distillation of a lifetime of science and exploring. You know, our father's goal was to take the envelope of science and push it out a little bit farther. And, you know, he would have loved to have that quintessential disclosure with the capital D event of the flying saucer landing on the White House lawn and Walter Cronkite narrating it. But I think he dragged a lot of us along a little bit further out to the edge. There's a phrase I've mentioned here at the conference that I think helps sum up our father's attitude that is often attributed to Richard Feynman. I don't know. But it's that there are two kinds of people in the world. Those who are okay with questions they cannot answer, and those who are not okay with their answers being questioned. It really is an interesting divide. I think pretty much everybody here is in that former camp. And I think a lot of people that we know that you talk to about UFO or other anomalous phenomena aren't comfortable leaning into it because they don't have a ready-made answer. Right? It's a little bit tough. We're pattern-seeking mammals. We want to have an answer. And so a lot of people I've heard say things like, well, I know the Navy has said they see things, but I don't know how they could get here. And they just stop. But what we can do, I think, to bring more people in and make the tent bigger is to say you don't need to know. There's evidence that something is happening, and you don't need to know if it's extraterrestrial or interdimensional. Just look at the evidence and don't necessarily grab the best available answer and shove it in. So with that, here's what we think is happening now. I mentioned the US government is not helpful. I don't think that's a controversial statement here, right? And if you think about it, I'm not going to do a role play that I've done before with the Air Force, but how many of you think, okay, first let me ask this, have we already had what you would consider to be disclosure? Okay, so what more do we want from them? If we've had disclosure, then we can't expect much more. For those of you who think we have not had disclosure, are you optimistic that we will? Okay, so in either case, well, big thumbs down from John. In either case, and it's not really in their interest, right? Just imagine the calculus they must go through of, is it going to tear apart the fabric of national security? Will the Russians have it? There's so many things that I think stop them from doing that. So to move this thing forward, we can't expect the government to drive the train. They can hop on the caboose if they want, but they're not driving it. So yeah, let's forget about them. Okay, moving on. Okay, science. So as I mentioned briefly, we feel that if we can have experiencers and people interested in the field talk to scientists in a way that's more productive, that can lead to real progress. So let's explore that a bit more. Scientists don't believe, right? People talk about our father and say, hey, he went from a debunker, which he was at first, to a believer. Well, and it's not a mere semantic difference, but he didn't really believe in UFOs. That's not what scientists do. They accept the weight of the data. And over time, he pulled out of the debunking parade because he was intellectually honest and said, something is going on here. I don't know what. And people would ask him, where are they from? And he wasn't that comfortable. And I think he mentioned in here, he left his mind open for that. But it's scientists that can really help us. So, and I've got a really good graphic for that. So, imagine you're a scientist. I mean, some scientists are just very closed-minded, right? And some are paid disinformants. But I think a lot of scientists don't have any axe to grind against UFOs or something else, but they're busy. So imagine, let's say you're an ancient archaeologist. Maybe all archaeologists are ancient. Anyways, you're an archaeologist dealing with an early period in history. And you're aware of the fine Graham Hancock's theories and others. Hi, Sandra.
Hello, Paul.
And you hear about 10, 12 alternative theories about your point in time. Well, PhDs have very narrow lanes. And if it's not exactly the Mesopotamian era from 400 BC to 300 BC, you're not really comfortable talking about something 100 years earlier because you focus so much on that. But also, if there are all these theories swirling around, you're busy getting a grant, you're teaching, you have research, you have your book, because you have to publish or perish. You may or may not have tenure already. You've got a family, you've got all these things. You're busy. It doesn't really help you to sort of latch onto one of these alternative theories, and you don't really know which one is the best. So you're just busy. And that's a point I heard from Michael Shermer, and I'll talk more about him. And I think that's an interesting point, that there's not always, I think we have a tendency to sometimes demonize scientists and say there's this dogmatic firewall. And there may be to some degree, but I think it's less that than they're just busy. They've got other stuff going on, and there's not a lot of benefit from them to put their name on the line for a theory that they haven't had time to adequately research the way that they think they should. So there are 3 scientists that we have access to that we think could be instrumental in this process. It's your turn. Yeah.
Out at the FAST telescope, the 500-foot aperture radio telescope in western China.
If we are being visited by extraterrestrials from other planets, more likely than not, they've gone through a technological AI singularity that I believe